we're going to look at all of this from the perspective of the water manager. So all of these things we talk about here, no one cares about the flow of a river. You care about the flow of a river when there's too much for your purpose or too little for your purpose. No one cares about soil moisture because, oh, beautiful soil. They care about soil moisture because we grow food on our soil. We have cities next to our sea levels. So rather than, as in most of the rest of the talks, the water manager is at the very end of the discussion after all the satellites and models. Here, the water manager is number one. So this is a product which has been published by UNESCO in collaboration with our center, with Deltaris of the Netherlands, the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, some universities, and then the World Bank and the Dutch water people kind of in the background helping out, but not officially. So it's called CRIDE, or Analysis de, well, I'll let the translations there, Climate Risk Informed Decision Analysis. Next, please. Thank you. So there's been lots of thinking about how to integrate climate change in water resources. And the climatologists will be happy to tell you this is a climate problem. And water is a subset of it. But these are water problems and they have to be solved by us, by the water people. And so that's what we need to build on, is the way we manage water, not distort everything. Next, please. So for example, beautiful climate model, global climate model, and there it is. They were designed by climatologists for climatologists and to predict future climate. Great, but they often disagree. So this one says we're getting wetter, this one says we're getting drier, and there aren't just two climate models. Next. There are lots of climate models. And in fact, next. How do you know which climate model to pick? There's 30-some models times how many different possibilities for realizations for industrial carbon dioxide production. Which do you like? You like that one or that one? I don't know, right? So they're not really very helpful. They depend on many assumptions, and they often disagree, especially in temperate zones like we are in right now. Thanks. Next. So this was the issue about 10 years ago. We had a meeting in Washington organized by the World Bank, and a grand old man of hydrology at the bank, Luis Garcia, would say, we do all these climate models and we downscale them and we do this and that. We spend $1 million. The consultant comes back and says, the future is uncertain. Thank you very much. Thank you for my $1 million. So not very useful. And a lot of that is because what they call a cascade of uncertainties from these very uncertain models and uncertain futures and uncertain regional scenarios when we downscale them, and then the models themselves, and then the local uncertainties. What's going to happen with our laws and policies and population. Next, please. So here's just an example I pulled from a recent study of the city of Philadelphia. So these are water supply people, and they said, do we need to build new water supply infrastructure? Simple question, right? Well, what's the climate going to be like in 50 years or something? Oh, well, on average, and this actually, I believe, yeah, So the wettest years, on average, 4% to 9% more water. Okay, great. But look in the details. These are just nine global climate models. And one says, you know, that maybe we'll have a decrease of 30%. This one says we'll have an increase of 48%. Which do you like? What do you do with that? Next, please. So, well, one option is to make even more complicated models, you know, to make sure we get everything in there. So, you know, Nature, gee, that's a pretty good journal. So, you know, that says we need access to capital, the degree to which we use green technologies, carbon, justice, public opinion, in politics. Is that helpful? Is that really going to help us with the future uncertainties? Next, please. So one of the real problems with water management, we have created ourselves. And we created it with, you know, the so-called Harvard water program. And it was because what we were doing was optimizing our system. We thought before all this climate change stuff, we thought we more or less understood our water systems, the degree of uncertainty, right? We have standard methods with our river flow, our rainfall for estimating the uncertainty. And based on that, the Harvard Water Program, which was adopted by the major water supply agencies, said we're looking for the one best design, So we're optimizing. Now, how does that work in deep uncertainty? Next. So basically, over the 10 years after this meeting, we started saying, this is the wrong way to do things. We don't just get a consultant to look at a bunch of climate models and then hope maybe those are good climate models, the right ones, and generate scenarios and see if the system is vulnerable. That tells us something, but it's a small subset of what we're looking for. So we would start with the planner. Remember, everything we're doing in this room, everything we've talked about is for someone who's using water, who's planning and managing water. So the question is, when this guy wakes up in the middle of the night and thinks, I'm going to lose my job, what is he thinking about? In one case, it might be multi-year droughts in the future. Well, we've had 2-year droughts, that was okay, but maybe we're going to get 4-year droughts. That's not okay. So, or if obviously, you know, others are worried about floods, others are worried about population growth, land use change, policy changes. They're not even worried about climate, they're worried about other things. So, we basically start with the planner and think about what they need, and then find out, well, what would break the system? What breaks your system? That's where we go. And then we start to bring in the climate data and past, present, future data, et cetera, and then look at the plausibility and risk and all those things. Next, please. So the beauty of that is it fits right into the standard, typical water resources planning. So we're not imposing some climate models on, we're not putting a whole new process in here. We're building on and inserting this into, these are standard processes. It's not just the Corps of Engineers and the Dutch Rijkswaterstaat, it's the World Bank and the ADB and the IDB and most major water planning organizations. Next, please. So this is a language that water managers speak. Next. So sometimes the vulnerability is not climate change. And that's the beauty of this, because the city of San Francisco Public Utilities Commission put together various workshops of people, and they said, what are the issues to you? Climate change, great, but they graphed all these things in terms of what they considered the most important, high importance, and also the uncertainty on the other axis. How well do we know this? And so climate, of course, oh my gosh. Well, look, there's climate. It's the second lowest risk of all these things. They're worried about the financial markets. They're worried about changes in water rights. Who owns the water? They're worried about earthquakes. This is San Francisco. They're much more worried about an earthquake tomorrow than climate change in 50 years, right? So all of these things are true. Politics and policies, regulations, technology, increases in water demand from population growth. All of these things are in there. So it puts climate in the context of the other risks and vulnerabilities that a water manager is looking at. Next, please. So that's why we're so big on the bottom-up approach. And we're behind, so I'm going to just hit some highlights of this approach. And so as I said before, you start once you're identifying what your risks are, and putting whatever drivers on that system and measuring those key things that people care about, right? They don't care about the flow in the river necessarily. They want to know how much water I'm going to get. And then when does the system break? That's this critical threshold process. So in the La Plata Basin, not everyone's looking at the same models for the same purpose, right? You've got water suppliers, you have agricultural people, you have cities who are worried about being flooded. You have people concerned with the ecosystem, if it's getting enough water or whether we're draining it. So all of those things are coming in early in the process here. Next. So this is where stakeholder engagement is so important. And people know that, but it's important to insert that into the process. And the Corps of Engineers version is, of course, the public participation, getting everyone at the table, but it also involves the modeling. All of us in this room, we do models, and that's important. And then we have that traditional water resources planning process, how things happen. So it's not like the Wild West. It's a process. Next, please. But the most important reason to have stakeholders there is stakeholders know about broken systems. They know, they can tell you what it means that the system is broken for them. So when we start looking for our metrics, for example, they will tell us, here's what we need, here's what when the system is not broken for us, and here's when the system is broken for us. Next. So great. Sorry, I said I wouldn't talk about models, so I won't, but you need a system model to basically, here's what we can control, here's what may drive the system, and it gives you some outputs that you can measure. That's all I'll say about that. So, here's just an example, right? Typical metrics. It could be keeping flood damages under my critical threshold of 2,000, whatever it is, $1 million. agricultural damages. It could be navigation. Navigation's big in the La Plata Basin. So we need to have enough flow in the river for boats of a certain size to get through. And of course, the ecological side of things. So this is where you've gotten the people together and you've figured out with your modeling what would break the system for them. Next, please. So this is just an example from a very large system of the Great Lakes along the US-Canadian border, managed by something called the International Joint Commission. Very large system. Next, please. And so, but even in very large systems, you can work on your your performance indicators, what indicates that your system is broken. And notice that the environmentalists did not cooperate and gave us 32 indicators, not very helpful. So you need a useful number of indicators. Next, please. So when you've done that, then you can really do the modeling and stress the system. And get a sense of the the uncertainty in that system. Next, please. So this is an example that our colleague Koen Verbist did when he was at UNESCO in Chile. And so this is the case of a reservoir in northern Chile, very dry area. And so the question is, what's the plausibility of failure of a broken system? Here is where all the models, as many models as you want, you can put in here. You can put the future climate models. You can do all the stochastic modeling of taking your existing historical stream flow or rainfall and mixing it up in different combinations and seeing what you might get from that. Whatever you want, you can put it in here. And so these are a bunch of I think these are climate models. And so you notice, so basically, this is okay. This is not okay. So this is moving into a drier, hotter future, and this is okay, or even better. So again, the details don't matter, but the issue is, are we getting enough flow into this reservoir, which will then be used mostly for agriculture in this area. And so then you can take all this stuff and you can talk to people, to your stakeholders again. You're coming back to them. And in this case, a lot of scatter in the diagram, right? A lot of scatter in the data. So clearly the analytical uncertainty is high. And then you ask people, well, what does 75% mean to you? Probably, 3 to 1 odds that your children and grandchildren will not be able to have the same success with water that you have. And so they kind of put it into, well, that's, fairly high risk, not 95%, but in there. And the purpose of this diagram is just, if you have low uncertainty, you really think you know your system, and your future risk is low, you don't have to do anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. It's working well, risk is low, uncertainty is low. But if you get into this zone, this is especially where you need an approach like what we're talking about. Next, please. Okay, and most of you know about different plans, flexible. The thing is, we are not optimizing if we're in an area with a lot of uncertainty, plausible uncertainty. We need robust plans for a wide variety of unknown conditions, and we need flexible plans so that if we're wrong, which we likely are, that we can move from from one plan to another. And so I probably have too many slides here, but let's move. Right, so here are classic, you're along a river like the Rhine River, and you're worried about, increases in flows. I can build dikes and levees. I can build walls around my cities. I can move my cities back, so-called room for the river, as the Dutch call it. So those are all possibilities. Next. And, but each of those, as the conditions get worse, whether it's increasing discharge or sea level, each of those will, what? They will fail at a certain point. And so that's what we're concerned about because of the high uncertainty. Next. And so we call it this metro system because it's going to have analogs to this. So I'm in Buenos Aires here. I'm in the suburbs here in the south, and I want to get to here. There are different ways to go, right? Maybe I know this line is usually really bad, but it's closer. So I know that if the train breaks down, here, I can take this other pathway and get around it, right? So we have cost issues and time issues, but the point is you have options here, and that's what we're looking for. We're not optimizing my trip. I'm going to leave a little early and make sure that I can get where I need to go. Next. So yeah, so each of these then has the point where they next please, where they break down, but some of them I can take a detour. So if I have a small dike, and things are getting close to failure, I can still move across. I can still move some cities back away from the river. So it's the flexible, robust options that we're looking for. Next, then you can go back to your stakeholders, and the decision makers come in here, right? Because you're starting to present those options. You're starting to say, well, you could do this. You could build this huge dike. It's going to be $1 billion. Is that okay? And maybe you'll say, will that give me, 99% success with all this scatter of data? Maybe it's worth $1 billion, but you may choose to take some of the other approaches where you can then take a different subway and get around any problems and keep going. So I'm going to forget about step 4 here. There's 5 of them, and so keep going. Okay, so that, yeah, that's okay. So just to remind everyone that we're starting from the bottom. We move all the models and general circulation models and regional climate models and all the stochastic stuff, and we put it in only when we need it. And some people in the La Plata Basin are studying ecosystems, and others are managing urban water supply, and others are worried about their crop production. So it just depends on who you are and why you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Next, please. So the question is just, is anyone using this? And the answer, first of all, is yes, the state of California is using it. It's their official climate change adaptation strategy, and they're the 5th largest economy in the world if they were a country. So that's pretty important. But it also, our friends in Deltares have applied it in Guayaquil. We've applied it successfully in Thailand, and that's also Thailand. This is for biosphere reserves for major international ecosystems. We're working on it in Southern Africa. It was implied in Zambia. So it's been applied in very wealthy areas and very not so wealthy areas. So I think I have maybe one more slide, maybe two. Oh, and just, yeah, you can use this with, say, World Bank projects as well, because they were developed along with World Bank's version is the decision tree framework, and it's optimized for the World Bank projects. But you can use CRIDE and get full credit, basically, for the vulnerability assessment of your project. So last, I think. Nope, second to last. There's a lot online now. UNESCO has been doing open learning courses on CRIDE. Unfortunately, we just finished a Spanish one, but look a few months up. Or there's an English version if you want to practice your English that just started this week, but it's mostly recorded online at the beginning, so you're not missing anything if you start next week. So that's openlearning.unesco.org. And if you want to practice your French or Arabic, we just released those at the COP27. You never know. And Portuguese is probably the next language that we'll do before Chinese or Arab or what's the Russian? Russian, yes. We'll probably wait on the Russian. Next, please. So this should be the right, yeah. So on my way out the door, I just want to say that a lot of these same kinds of issues come up with water infrastructure. So this is water infrastructure comes up here where people say, well, can your model incorporate water management in the form of infrastructure? And this is a huge question. So there's trillions of dollars of infrastructure, of dams and levees and reservoirs, et cetera, out there. And the question is, do we have to manage that totally differently? It's there. We're not building anything new right now. It's infrastructure, it's there. And so how do you go about deciding if you're going to have to do something totally differently? And so we had a special issue of water policy a little less than a year ago that explored those. No conclusions yet, but if you're interested in exploring those issues, that's a great place to start. There's about 15 papers and some summary papers at the beginning to explore the issues. With that, I'm sorry, I don't have like 30 of these. These are just the Spanish ones. I was out of the English ones, but about 3 per country. If folks want to just come up and if you're going to actually give it a look, please feel free to take one.